Dr. Michael Alexander is past president of the American Academy for Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine from 1993 to 1994. He also served as Scientific Program Committee Chair and Treasurer. Dr. Alexander's extensive career has encompassed research, quality improvement and quality assurance, medical education, and compassionate patient care. Probably best known as co-author of the pediatric rehabilitation textbooks, Dr. Alexander is also credited with leading the team which created the Pediatric Inpatient and Outpatient Standards for the Commission for Accreditation for Rehabilitation Programs, CARF. Additionally, the topics of his countless invited lectures and his work in film speak to his creativity, curiosity, and his passion for rehabilitation technology and teamwork to enhance participation. Dr. Alexander has generously volunteered his time to numerous professional medical and nonprofit organizations, frequently serving in leadership positions, and most recently serving as president of the Medical Society of Delaware. His personal experience with childhood onset disability has given him the drive and compassion to make the world a better place for those with whom he can relate and for whom he can advocate. Dr. Alexander lives in Delaware with his wife and near their 3 children and 5 grandchildren. He sings tenor with the St. Mary of Assumption guitar group Sing Praise and the New Art Chorale, and he enjoys his aquatic plants and deck garden just outside his back door. The pond and deck are wheelchair accessible, by the way. Welcome, Dr. Alexander. I'm thrilled to have you on this Past President tribute. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, why don't we get started? I'm thrilled to have you here, and I guess the first question that everybody wants to know is, why did you choose to devote your career to physiatry?
Well, having had polio at age 3, I thought I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, but I was encouraged to look at physical medicine and rehabilitation as my specialty instead, because short of being in the operating room, there was a lot of overlap between those two medical specialties. And by being a physiatrist instead of an orthopedist, I could better accommodate to any changes in my physical abilities as I aged, where if I were to remain a surgeon, they might have interfered with being able to be a competent surgeon.
So I'm curious what led you to become a physician in the first place?
Well, I was just impressed by the increased number of medical people that were in my experience. I went to clinics and saw doctors over the years, but what really influenced me was when I became a patient at the Alfred I. DuPont Institute in Wilmington, Delaware, and got to know Dr. Dean McEwen.
So what led you to pediatrics?
Well, the adult rehab is interesting and was challenging, but I just found I liked relating to children and their parents. I had more of a compatibility with what their concerns and drives were. And as a lot of pediatricians will tell you, dirty adults smell a lot worse than dirty children.
It is true, it is true. And did anyone ever discourage you from becoming a physician because you had a disability?
Well, my dad was concerned that I wouldn't be able to keep up and make it through the training. And so was encouraged, not discouraging me, but kept pointing me in other directions. Although he also didn't think I should be a lawyer because he didn't think many of them made enough money to really be worth anything. So I shared this concern with Dr. McEwen, who had just asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I think I want to be a teacher. And he said, you think? Don't you know what you want to be? And I said, well, honestly, I don't know. Part of me thinks I can be a physician, but my dad says that might be too hard. And he says, well, you come up to Wilmington for this summer and you can follow my residents around. I'll put you on a research project. And if you can keep up with the residents, that's the test that you're going to be able to make it as as a physician. So I took him up on the offer and came up and spent that summer and then an additional summer working on some research projects with him, tending clinics, helping put casts on, going to the operating room, doing experimental surgery on animals with Dr. McEwen, and just loved it and found I could do it just quite well.
Aren't we lucky that Dr. McEwen encouraged you to do this and that you maybe didn't listen to your father?
Yeah, sometimes it's true. You don't want to listen to your father.
You had some pretty amazing mentors throughout your career. Can we talk about them? Maybe starting with Ernie Johnston.
Ernie Johnson was the chairman of the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at Ohio State. And when I was interviewing for residencies, I didn't actually get to interview with him, but I interviewed at about 5 centers around the country, Seattle and Minnesota and Washington, D.C. And I would always ask these programs to rank the top 3 training programs in America. And, they all ranked themselves number 1, but every one of the ones I interviewed at ranked Ohio State as number 2. And if you know anything about ranked voting possibilities, that made up my mind back then that I wanted to go to Ohio State. And Dr. Johnson was just energetic, had ideas and thoughts about everything, was a consummate observer of human movement, kinesiology, and reading body language, and just a font of knowledge about the history of medicine and of rehabilitation medicine in particular, and was into engineering and electromyographic equipment, but also into orthotics and prosthetics and team dynamics, and just basically gave me a model for how you can enjoy practicing your specialty and meet the needs of your patients throughout a career.
That's pretty cool. And you'd mentioned Fritz Kotke and Daniel Halpern, I believe, and Jesse Easton.
While I was a resident, Dr. Johnson wanted me to get to know these individuals because they were at the University of Minnesota, and they were active in the CP Academy and well respected. And he arranged for me to take a course there that lasted a couple of weeks and then stay on for some additional time. And I was able to follow them around. Dr. Kotke was another physiatrist, and Dan Halpern was a psychologist, and Jesse Easton was another individual with in pediatric rehabilitation, who herself had some neurologic problem that she had compensated for and was practicing well.
And how about your mentors within the academy?
Well, my big mentor within the academy was Robert Christopher, who was also an old polio. And Bob and I had gotten to know each other in the Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, where I was his scientific program chair. And then he arranged for me to, when he was on the ascendancy to president in the CP Academy, he brought me on board to again help him with his scientific program. And then as sort of the parting present or influence in my life, he got the nominating committee to nominate me into the president-elect succession chain within the CP Academy.
I hope you found that rewarding. I hope you appreciated that nomination.
It meant a lot.
Yeah. And can you tell me a little bit about Dr. Jesse Wright?
Well, Jesse Wright is a former president of the CP Academy. And Jesse was at my first appointment I had after I left Ohio State. I had been the medical director for a number of years, and she was a pediatric oriented physiatrist who had trained there in Pittsburgh and spent some time in New York City. And she, while I never met her, I inherited all these excellent people that she had nurtured and worked with over the years, and inherited her practice, and got to have not only current patients she was treating, but some older individuals who had been previous patients there. I was able to review her medical records, and when we did a couple papers that we published on post-polio syndrome, I had the advantage of working from her medical records to then my contemporary exam and evaluation of these people. So we were able to make a number of observations. And again, she was kind of in love with technology as well. She brought rocking beds over to Western Pennsylvania from France and combined them with external chest cuirasses, and had been helping these children breathe without having to have tracheostomies and in their neck, which really made it a lot easier to have quality of life for these kids. And this was similar to research I had been doing, again, with Dr. Johnson when I was at Ohio State. So it just came together beautifully.
Wow. As far as your friends, your most cherished friends within the academy, who were they?
Well, they were a number of people. Dr. Molnar and Gloria Eng were pediatric physiatrists, but were also involved in the CP Academy. Dr. Eugene Black, an orthopedic surgeon, who was quite a unique individual. And I had many conversations. Dr. Gabler Spira, again, Bob Christopher. There were just a number of these people. Pediatric physiatry, I was among one of the first people to have both boards that was working in that. So we were a small club, and we tended to hang out together, not only at the CP Academy meetings, but at the American Academy of Physical Medicine as well. So we ran into each other at least twice a year.
Right.
Sometimes it was 1 week right after the next week, because the annual meetings sometimes came awfully close to each other.
And you helped, or you started writing chapters for Dr. Molnar's textbooks, and then later went on to take over writing the textbooks with Dr. Matthews.
Dr. Molnar edited the first pediatric rehabilitation medicine textbook. It was in the Licht series, and then asked me to do a chapter in the book for her. And then over the next 2 or 3 editions, she asked me to continue to do that chapter and do one or more. And then she reached the point where she wanted to groom somebody to take over the book. So we co-edited an edition together, and from there I went on to I picked another colleague to work with, Dennis Matthews, and he and I did the next couple editions of the pediatric rehabilitation medicine textbook.
And it's my understanding that pretty much you guys have educated all the pediatric physiatrists out there at this point. Everybody's used these textbooks. So I'm honored to have the opportunity to meet the guy and interview the guy who's educated all the pediatric physiatrists that I know, for sure. I think it's pretty cool. What were the highlights of your presidency that year, 1993 and 1994? But first, I'm curious, where was the meeting held that year?
It was in Nashville,
All
I think,
right.
right near the Grand Ole Opry.
Oh, fun. I bet that was a great time to have. Or I hope you were able to enjoy it. You were probably working the whole time.
I got out one night. We had a reception, and we went to a performance there at the Grand Ole Opry. Yes.
Wonderful. So, can you tell me a little bit about the highlights from that year?
Well, for my theme, I had picked traumatic brain injury as something I wanted to highlight. Children with traumatic brain injuries were at that period of time were still somewhat divorced from or distanced from people that were doing a lot of the pediatric rehabilitation. And they shared so many overlaps with the developmentally delayed children and children with cerebral palsy. And
Hmm.
I just wanted to make sure that we included them. So we had several workshops that addressed those issues. And then the other thing I wanted to do was highlight two individuals who had a significant achievement in their life in the area of disability advocacy and just advancing the awareness of the public of what disabled people could do and how some of society's quirks and architectural barriers were still affecting them. And so I had a Beverly Chapman, who was a friend who had a congenital dystrophy, who had become a strong advocate for disability rights in the country. Beverly was, I think, elected as the second or third Miss America, which is how I first met her. They had the pageant in Columbus, Ohio, and Dr. Johnson thought I should be participating in that in the competition and the judging. So he assigned that to me as one of my resident responsibilities for a couple of weeks.
Sounds like a pretty nice assignment.
It was fun. Some very smart, good-looking gals that I got to hang with. I was married, so I had to be respectful of that. But yes, it was a lot of fun. A lot of interesting women that I got to know. But she had been very active in disability rights in Florida. She was responsible for the um, traffic highways around Orlando, the express roads, eventually being much more friendly to people that had difficulty rolling down their windows and reaching out and throwing money into the receptacles that you pitch your 25 cents or 30 cents into. Basically, what she advocated for was what we have now, the pass cards that you clip to the inside of your windshield, and we no longer have to stop to throw money and
Hmm.
get change from a ticket taker. And her protest consisted of the day they put those up, she went out of her way to run through all the detectors that were there to catch her for not being able to throw her money into these automated coin receivers. And that made all the newspapers. And then it was just a few months later that they had gone ahead and upgraded the systems to then not require that inconvenience.
That's a pretty amazing feat. I recall that she showed up that day and the cops were waiting.
Oh, they were
And
waiting there for the cameras, but
uh-huh.
nobody wanted to pull her over or fuss at her because
Yes,
I think they knew better than that. And she was
exactly.
hoping they would,
Uh-huh.
she would have loved it if they'd dragged her off in handcuffs
Yeah.
in her wheelchair, but instead they just waved her through.
So it's a pretty it turned out to this amazing story of you wanting to highlight her work and her achievements turned into a very unique, embarrassing moment for you
Well,
in
it
your
could have
presidential
been
year.
devastating to my program. Beverly died while we were getting, the final phases of preparation for the meeting, and I wasn't going to have her to come and give a talk, and I had to recreate a talk from previous presentations and video. Her brother was into news media and had made videos of her and other disability rights people. And I had that available to me, but I had to get permission from the lady that was sponsoring the awards for that. And I was able to get it. And so that it became, instead of her being there to present a speech directly, it was kind of a profile of from all the different speeches she'd given over the years. And some supplemental narration from her daughter and from her brother and from me, just to sort of round that out.
Mhm. I'm sure it was gorgeous and beautiful, um, and a true tribute to somebody who made a tremendous difference. Um, it's a sad thing that happened. You mentioned another embarrassing moment. It's one that I'm sure many of the past presidents and future presidents can relate to.
Well, this dated back to when I was treasurer, but yes, discovering that we were running out of money and that we weren't in a good shape to do that, and then facing the fact that our meeting was scheduled for San Francisco within a few weeks after they had their earthquake that year, was pretty difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. That was 1991 that the earthquake happened, I believe.
Correct.
And what what did y'all do about that?
Well, I got on the phone and called the mayor's office and said, this is awkward. We want to have our meeting, but we certainly don't want to get in your way and interfere with anything that's going on in San Francisco. And the aide to the mayor said, "Oh no, please, geez, we really need you to come and spend your money."
Yeah,
So we went, and I think that was the easiest year we ever had getting
I
reservations
bet.
pretty much in any restaurant in San Francisco that you wanted to go to.
Wow. Yeah, I guess it would be similar to us holding a conference here in New Orleans shortly after a Katrina or something like that. We'd be desperate for people to come to town and spend their money. That would make a lot of sense. Um, how do you think the field has changed over the years, for better or for worse?
Oh, I think the field has gotten much better over the years.
And in what ways?
Well, in a couple. One simple one is that everybody acknowledges there's a need for competency in understanding the needs of developmentally disabled children and cerebral palsy children, and have people that are trained in dealing with children and the families taking care of those children, those age groups. That, as everybody always says, children are not little adults. They're a different, unique set of problems. And the other thing that's changed is just that medicine has become much more open and receptive to the fact that the families and the children have to be part of the rehabilitation process, that we have to understand those dynamics and make sure they understand how to work within the system. And we need to model this behavior for them so that they're capable of doing it. So the fact that we now had parents that were attending team rehabilitation, interdisciplinary team meetings, was something that added so much to the care. And then I guess the third would be just how the availability of technology keeps pyramiding on itself to allow more and more access of children and adults to the environment, augmentative communication, new mobility devices, car modifications. It's just been incredible.
I'm curious when you saw the shift to more patient family-centered care. When did that start to happen?
Well, that was starting in the 80s. We hosted a meeting in Wilmington, Delaware for the Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation Programs, CARF, and hosted individuals from different pediatric programs. And we developed guidelines for inpatient and outpatient programs that then became the basis for the accreditation process that rehabilitation programs needed and wanted to have.
What are you most proud of in your career?
Well, I think I'm very proud of that particular era, the getting the standards articulated to the point where people could recognize quality programs as distinguished from programs that weren't quite so well, and having it working in a way that was inspiring people to want to do a better job, and from the preparation process then going on to do a better job.
What other areas are you most proud of? You had mentioned a few to me when we talked previously.
Well, I had activities in Poland that were quite satisfying for me. The Project Hope actually wasn't just the sailing ship, but they funded different kind of medical programs in different countries of the world, and they had developed a hospital in Krakow, Poland, which was a general services children's hospital, but they made the decision to want to improve pediatric rehabilitation. So I was allowed to put together an interdisciplinary team with a registered nurse and an OT and PT and speech pathologist and social worker. And we went over and spent a week and a half in Krakow, Poland, kind of surveying where they were and what they were doing, and then began to put together an education program for individuals. And so we brought over a number of physicians, therapists, one psychologist, and allowed them to participate in our interdisciplinary process that we were doing there in Wilmington, and then would go back and spend some time observing these people to see if anything had caught on. And it kind of culminated at the end of the period of time, which was over about 2 years, of attending a conference that was jointly planned by parents and the rehab staff that involved clinicians from all over Poland, and in particular those from Krakow, and just to see how far that had come. And it was just very gratifying. First time I went to Poland, I never saw different disciplines interacting with each other at all. Therapists had their own little small treatment cubicles, and they would take the child in there and do their thing with them and then bring them back out. The parents weren't incorporated into that. There wasn't a lot of family teaching or awareness of what to be doing with these children. And by the time I came back 2 years later, Dr. Matuszewska and her colleagues had just had a very good looking program, which I actually learned a few things I hadn't known before from some of the panel discussions that I got to participate in.
Wow, that's pretty neat. And how about your advocacy for technology?
Well, I've always loved playing with gizmos and different things. So I've always tried to stay on top of augmentative communication field and environmental control technology, and was always able to find the money to fund having technicians to be accessible for adapted seating and for working with the equipment. It was fun to see the development of augmentative technology specialists, having had some of those people that went on in the field formerly work for me. I watched as the amount of memory that could be devoted in a computer to facilitating communication work. In the early days, I'm sure some people still remember, we had to almost stack Apple One computers on top of each other to do what we wanted. We had to use one computer just to take the input of information, and a second computer to array it in a way that the individual person could use it, and then a third computer to finally execute the original software that we were trying to do. And it is neat to see that right now in your iPhone, you have much more power and options available to you than we had back then.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool, and it's really neat that you consistently advocated to have people on your team that were working in that field, and even now I think there's programs struggle to continue to have people that are in assistive technology, and because there's not always money for that, and it's great that early on you saw that as a tremendous need, and that you advocated for that and had it as part of your program.
As you've just pointed out, it's come a long way, but it has a long way to go. Medicare still doesn't want to authorize payment for a power wheelchair if you need it just to get around your community. They don't want to pay for your going to church and to the grocery store and to the library unless you also need it to get from your bathroom to your bedroom. And don't get me started on hearing aids, but again, that's just a long way to go, but at least we're beginning to have more people recognize we should be there.
Yes, absolutely. And to me, it's the secondary conditions and the issues that occur when you don't have the access to the technology, and you don't want to pay for something on the front end, but the repercussions are going to be that much more expensive.
Well, I hope it continues to keep this focus on looking at outcome measures and the ability to know what of all the many things we're doing, which are the most effective and providing the best benefit for our patients. Also, we need to develop the instruments that let us gauge the value of letting that example of the adult be able to get to church and go to the library and go to the grocery store by themselves in terms of meeting what's going on. We need to continue to be involved, working in ways to involve families and help them develop confidence in their ability to interact with legislatures, to interact with politicians and insurance companies and policy planners.
And that's very important of the advocacy work that needs to happen. You had mentioned to me that we also needed to minimize the resentment from people without disabilities, for people with disabilities to get help. I was curious if you wanted to talk about that.
It is unfortunate that we have people that get upset sometimes when they see resources in their minds being squandered on individuals with disabilities. We've always had that problem. I mean, in people see individuals with disabilities as not as being useless eaters, people that are just
Mhm.
wasting resources, and don't see them as unique beings that may motivate or stimulate people to just to levels of satisfaction that aren't there. There are so many characters, and I'm talking about my patients, that I knew over the years that were just funny and exciting and assertive, and really were invaluable to their families and their communities.
Yeah.
But people don't always see that, or they don't weigh that properly.
Do you have advice for current members of the Academy?
Well, I guess one of my advices to the members of the current academy is to stay contemporary in your knowledge with what your other colleagues in their fields are doing. One of the advantages for me of the CP Academy meetings were I always would try to come away with a few important improvements that the therapists or the sociologists or psychologists were pointing out, so that I could kind of blow my colleagues out of the water with being contemporary in their fields. I think that this ability to benefit and learn from colleagues is something that, if you work at it a little bit, really becomes reinforcing of bringing the field together.
For sure. You also mentioned the legislation.
Well, that's the other thing that to me has been very important. I looked at my involvement in the state medical society in Delaware as a chance to make sure that the agendas of my patients and their families were looked at and supported by organized medicine in general.
Mhm.
And so I spent several years going down to Dover, Delaware, to be the what we were called the physician of the day, and we would hang out around the Senate and the House chambers in Dover, and we would have meetings where we would go meet with them and talk about different issues, and um, they would be able to ask us questions about stuff that they were being lobbied to introduce into bills. And I never had that opportunity, but every once in a while, they managed to provide a little first aid or support to legislators that were overheated or having chest pains or indigestion, and keep a presence there. And I always felt that having an activity and a presence in an organization that is looking at legislative and state issues was an important role as well, and that people need to know what's going on in the legislature with different bills over the years, and both at the state and the national level. You know, the ADA was a wonderful bill passed over 30 years ago, but every year or so, somebody's trying to chip away at it and erode
Exactly.
some of the effectiveness based on how that particular politician is being lobbied by people.
Right. Right. It's a very important point, and it's really good advice for current members. Both of your points. How would you want to be remembered, or how do you want to be remembered?
Well, I guess being remembered as somebody that tried to put the patient and family first,
Yeah.
and deliver competent and compassionate care. And then aside from that, maybe as being a halfway decent grandpa.
I think you're definitely going to be remembered as a halfway decent grandpa based on the pictures that I saw, and the happy family and the grandkids. They're they look like they're having a great time with you these days, that's for sure. Now, what gives you hope?
Well, I'm always, every time I meet a new group of residents and students and therapists, it's just nice to see that there are people coming in enthusiastic about caring for this population that aren't jaded. I think it would be terrible if all the care was just delivered by, people at the same age and the same stage of their careers. I think it
Yeah.
would be detrimental. But the fact that there's constant infusion of new talent and enthusiastic talent is always been encouraging throughout my whole career.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have anything to add before we close out the interview? You told me the best story about one of your patients. It was a fantastic advocacy story, and I didn't know if you wanted to share that or keep that
Well,
one
I
to
was
yourself.
taking care of a young woman that was born without arms and who had adapted to that incredibly well. She used her legs uh, as well as some people use their arms. She was also lucky enough to have a father who is one of these people that could just invent something if it wasn't there. He had developed hand controls for her to use to drive the pickup. He had invented safety pins that had flanges on them so that she could open them and close them with her toes. And she had a baby, and somebody that worked for the state thought that here was a woman that wasn't married, that didn't have arms, shouldn't have a baby, and managed to get a court order to take the baby away from the mother. And I was asked by the lawyer to do a letter. And I said, no, I'd rather testify in court for this woman because she was doing a great job. And but that I wanted her to demonstrate to the judge just how good she was. And so we arranged to bring in a changing table her father had it invented, the safety pins, the diapers. Um, they weren't using any kind of paper throwaway diapers. These were the real cloth diapers. And I remember watching proudly as she took the baby, who had gratified us by doing a number one and a number two all the way through the process, and powder up in the air and everything really well. And you probably aren't of the age that knew that one of the tricks mothers used with safety pins when they were pushing them through diapers was to bring it up and rub it through some of the oil on their scalp to lubricate it enough to get the pins to go through the cotton fibers. But she whipped those pins right up to her hair with her foot and put them in. And I watched the judge's eyes just dilate when she saw that. And of course, we finish up testimony, and I was asked if she'd done a good job. And I said, I thought she'd done a better job than I was doing on my children at the time. And the judge immediately dismissed the case and gave her back her baby. And I understand things got quite awkward and heated for that lawyer and social worker. But I mean, that just sort of, here was a woman with a disability who had made it, in my opinion, who had a father who was even helping her make it even better. And we still had a system that thought she was inadequate to be a mother, but was given the opportunity to prove she could do it and did it.
Ever the fighter, ever the fighter, ever the advocate. It's an amazing story, and she was very fortunate to have you as her physician, to go there and to think ahead enough to whisper in that baby's ear to let him know what he needed to do to help out with the situation.
Well, that I can take no credit for. That was the baby's genius.
Well, I am tremendously grateful for you taking the time to be part of this past president tribute, and I've really, really enjoyed getting to know you through this, and I see why everybody looks at you as their hero. Like I've said to you before, so many people have emailed me about how excited they were to hear your interview. And it's been really wonderful hearing your stories and learning about your experiences. So thank you.
You're welcome.